Hi, I'm Dr. Christy Mulkey, and I'm the workshop coordinator for 240 Tutoring. Today, I'm here to bring you part 4, our final video in our series on English language arts, writing, and grammar conventions. So let's get started. I'm going to share my screen with you so that you can see the PowerPoint. Makes it a little easier for you to make notes. Now again, this is our final video in this series, part 4, and we're going to focus on teaching these grammar and writing conventions to English language learners. Now, if you missed parts 1, 2, and 3, I highly suggest you go watch those first so you understand those skills before we talk about how do you teach them. Now, if you're wondering, is this content on my test? Here's a chart that will show you. Now, I want to note something I added. If you've been watching this series, you may think, there's now 3 things highlighted in yellow instead of just 2. I added a row in here for the TExES, PPR, EC through 12 exam. You'll see there is a competency with 2 knowledge and skill statements noted here about teaching reading, writing, and conventions to English language learners. So if you're taking that test, this video is for you too. Now, let's talk about what is an ELL. Some of you might have gotten hung up on that acronym right off the bat. An ELL is an English language learner. English language learners have a primary language other than English, and they can be at different stages of English language development. These various levels mean that the teacher must scaffold their instruction. And when we say scaffold, we mean adjust that instruction to the level where the child is at. So you are meeting them where they are. Now let's talk about writing for ELLs. Our beginning ELL writers. Now there are 4 levels of writers. We're going to talk about the middle 2 today, and I'll quickly go over the other 2. So if we're looking at beginning English language learner writers, they have very limited vocabulary and a very limited understanding of English grammatical structures. So their writing may be somewhat meaningless to a native speaker, especially if it's a topic they're not familiar with. Their writing can lack organization and those basic conventions we've been talking about. It may be incoherent. Again, very difficult for a native English speaker to read and understand. They can do the following: make lists. They can copy existing writing. This is actually something that the teacher can use to help them. They can use present tense. They'll struggle with past and future, but they can use present tense. And they can write high frequency words and sentences. So we can teach them some high frequency words and sentences and have them practice and memorize those, and those will give them some basic sentences they can write. They will have trouble with spelling, grammatical conventions, and all of those things. Now there's actually a step below beginning writers, and that would be emergent writers. A student in the emergent stage would not be able to present his or her thoughts in a manner that is easily understood, nor would he or she be able to use most, if any, common grammar structures. So if we look at the lowest level of writers, we have emergent. So basically their skills are extremely limited. And then we have our beginning English language learner writers, which we've discussed here. Now, if we move up a step from there, we will have our emergent ELL writers. They can write in a meaningful way, but it may still be somewhat limited. So they can write about topics that are familiar or concrete. They will struggle with things that are abstract, so those things they're not as familiar with. They begin to use those high frequency words accurately. They can write some simple sentences and those kinds of things. They will struggle with repetition of ideas or word choice. So they'll go back to those things they know and familiar with, and they may overuse them. They will use the present tense mostly, but they may start to use past and future, but there may be some errors in switching tenses. Now, they can, again, use those high frequency words, write those simple sentences well, and they can discuss concrete topics well. Now, if we were to go a step above this, that would be our advanced. An advanced student would be able to use most, if not all, grammar structures without any errors. They would be very comparable to a native speaker. Now let's talk about teaching strategies for ELLs. First, some general strategies. They need slow, targeted, explicit instruction on specific skills. So you take those skills, you target them, what are they struggling with, and you provide explicit instruction on those skills. Once they master it, you can move on to the next skill. Combining this with good, solid vocabulary, practice, and instruction through listening and speaking will help them advance in their writing abilities much more quickly and efficiently. So things to focus on: vocabulary instruction, but the academic content and everyday vocabulary. Simple grammatical and organizational structures. So break these grammatical conventions and structures, the organizational structures, down into simple skills and teach them, again, explicitly. Provide sentence starters. Some teachers struggle with this. They're like, well, why would I give them the start of the sentence? Because if we want to see, can the kid write about content, or can they get the idea across? Sometimes just getting them started where that convention and that structure is already somewhat there can really help them put their thoughts to paper much more accurately. So a sentence starter is a great strategy to use. And again, providing instruction one concept at a time. We cannot expect these students to gain multiple skills and concepts all at once. Things to remember. Grammar in the English language is relatively easy as compared to grammar in some other languages. Let me give you an example. The verb system in English is actually simpler because it doesn't require as much conjugation on the ending of each subject. For instance, walk is the form for I, we, you, they. I walk, we walk, you walk, they walk. Only he or she becomes walks. So he walks, she walks. Because nouns in the English language do not carry those gender markers, the adjectives that go with those nouns do not have gender markers either. So these things are actually easier in the English language. All right, there are some things that are tougher in the English language, or more tough in the English language. So words like should, may, could, these can be challenging for students, these right here, because those English language learners, their language does not have those words set up as independent words. We can also look at the conventions in capitalization, punctuation, and spelling and grammar differ from each language. So we have to provide that specific instruction on those conventions. So, for example, in English, there are often specific capitalization rules. So in the title of a composition in English, it's necessary to capitalize many words, like the first and last word of the title. Additionally, the words in between are also capitalized unless they're a preposition, a connecting word, or an article. And so lots of things have to be capitalized. However, if you look at Spanish, in contrast, when you're writing the title of a composition, only the first word is capitalized. So some of those conventions are unique to the English language, and the teacher's going to have to go back and backfill some of those conventions that seem pretty standard to us when you've grown up in the United States under native English instruction. Now let's try a couple of practice questions that you might see on an ESL test, that PPR test, that ESOL test in Florida. So we have an ESL or an ESOL teacher has a writing sample from a new English language learner in her classroom. The student was able to write a few simple sentences with phonetic spelling and with a few errors in basic skills, capitalization, and punctuation. The teacher may deduce that the student is at which stage of writing. So again, those stages we talked about. All right, give you a second to think about that. The correct answer here is B. B, because they are able to write those simple sentences, and they do have some phonetic spelling, and they do have some capitalization and punctuation correct, but just a few errors. So the beginning would be correct. Remember, an emergent student would not be able to communicate ideas very coherently at all and would not have hardly any grammar structure. An intermediate student would be able to present their thoughts in an organized manner and would have less grammatical errors. You might not see that phonetical spelling. You should be able to see basic capitalization and punctuation. And in the advanced, they would be much more like their peers with few, if any, grammar errors or structural errors at all. Now, I want to throw out this idea. You've got to know some terminology to be successful in this question. So if you see words in a practice question that you don't know, I highly suggest you go look those up. So here's some academic language, that ELL, that phonetic, if you don't know what phonetic spelling is, which basically is spelling it the way it sounds. So you're sounding it out to spell it. Another word, deduce. So be able to conclude, to come up with an idea. So deduce. So if you see words you don't know, look those up. Make sure you add those to your vocabulary. Next question. Esmeralda, an ELL student, writes the following in her journal. The whole family went to the park. Sarah jumped out of the car to get to a swing first. She barely beats her brother to the only open swing. Based on this writing, Esmeralda would most likely benefit from further instruction in. Now, if you look down here, you will see a lot of those conventions that we've talked about in parts 1, 2, and 3 of this video series. So if you don't know those, you can't answer this question, which is why if you listen to the beginning of part 1 of this series, I talk about it's important for you to know the skills and the conventions yourself so you can apply them in an instructional setting. If you don't know what these are, you can't answer this question. So let's go back and look at this. The whole family went to the park. Sarah jumped out of the car to get to a swing first. She barely beats her brother to the only open swing. Complete and incomplete sentences. All those sentences were complete, so she does not need further instruction there. Pronoun antecedent agreement. So our pronoun here is, she, and the antecedent is Sarah. Those do match. Sarah is a she. So those do agree. So she does not need further instruction in that based on this sample. Subject-verb agreement. The whole family went to the park. Whole family went, that works. Sarah jumped out of the car to get to the swing first. Well, Sarah is singular. So if you watched video number 1, you know that jump would need an S on the end. Sarah jumps out of the car. So we do have a problem with subject-verb agreement. Let's check this last one using commas. None of these sentences require a comma, so no evidence here that she needs further instruction in using commas. Now, I hope you have found those practice questions helpful. I want to remind you that it's often helpful to go look at the standards and reread those before you take the exam. Here you can see we were talking about competency 1 for the TExES ESL exam. The teacher understands fundamental language concepts and knows the structure and conventions of the English language. So that's what this whole series has been about. And then down here, if you look at this knowledge and skill statement, it's taking this and actually applying it to the instruction, the development of instruction for those English language learners. Now, if we look at the Florida standards, we were looking at competency 2, knowledge of the English language system, and all of these statements that apply under that. I show you this because sometimes just reading these will help you determine vocabulary you don't know. So if you see some of these words like phonology or syntax and you don't know what those mean, you need to go look those up because these are the standards you're held accountable for. Now, I hope you have found this video series helpful in helping you to prepare for any of those exams that we talked about earlier. There's more information in our study guides. And of course, you can follow us on all our social media. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments and we will get back to you, or you can email us at workshops@240tutoring.com. Thank you so much for your time, and I wish you all the best. Again, I'm Dr. Christy Mulkey with 240 Tutoring.